How about some other questions? Yes, sir. If you can say it, maybe I can repeat it, or Steve can repeat it.
Conquered territories, and how would you relate the Quebec Act to all this? Because that was a conquered territory, whereas the Americans were settled territories, even had the real estate law that their land was supposed to be owned and free and common soakage, like the land in County Kent, as I recall.
Well, this is a big issue that historians are now writing about. How did the colonies get justified? And they're conquered territories from the English point of view. Jefferson tries a more radical position. The Quebec situation, of course, is conquered, and the English response, we didn't mention the Quebec Act, which is terribly important because it really scares the bejesus out of the New Englanders, because it's a very liberal, enlightened act. It gives the French in Quebec the right to their religion and the right to the civil law. And this seems to these Protestant, and you have to understand that Protestantism and Englishness are really connected through the 18th century. England, that's starting really with Elizabeth. England becomes the spokes state, if you will, spokes nation for Protestantism against Roman Catholicism. And so to give the Roman Catholics in Quebec these kinds of rights to a Protestantized Englishman in Massachusetts or in New England is terrifying. They really think that some evil conspiracy has taken over. And of course, this plays into, the fear of Catholicism is very strong. It plays into the Gordon riots in 1780, which go on. How many days? Where half of London is wiped out. So the fear of Catholicism, I think, is a major force in the period.
Yeah, I wanted to add a bit on this. I mean, I just happened last summer to find a whole series of petitions from French-speaking or Francophone inhabitants of Quebec complaining about the Quebec Act. And I think that adds a different kind of dimension to this. I mean, I think everything that Gordon says, I don't disagree with, but a really important element here was about the civil law. So the argument that the French make is that the problem with the imposition of civil law, and they wanted an imposition of English common law in Quebec, is what these guys do. And there are really quite a lot of these things, and they have support from thousands of petitioners in England. What they say is, with civil law is really, really bad for commercial societies, French civil law. And what you really want is English common law, because that makes it much easier to trade, it makes it much easier to sell English manufacturers, and the development of a sort of robust manufacturing society, a consumer society in Quebec. And this is absolutely a huge issue. So to get back to your question, which was, is there a distinction between settled territories and conquered territories? The argument that these Quebecois petitioners make, and they have huge support, again, from this sort of patriot wing of the Whig Party, is that there is no distinction between settled territories and conquered territories. They should all have the right to English common law, whereas the arguments of the sort of authoritarian Whig lawyers like Alexander Wedderburn and Lord Mansfield is to insist on the difference between different kinds of territories, and they make an argument for legal pluralism, that there should be different laws appropriate to different sorts of peoples in the empire. And they do the same thing in Bengal. There's the same fight over Bengal, whether there should be English common law in Bengal, or whether there should be local Muslim law in Bengal. And Alexander Wedderburn and Lord Mansfield, the same people who defended the right to French civil law in Quebec, insist that there should be Muslim law in Bengal. So this is a huge debate. It's not an issue which is settled. I mean, I think it's not right to say that there's a settled constitutional issue of the difference between settled territories versus conquered territories, but it is a really, really hot topic from the middle of the 18th century straight through the 19th century.
And you can imagine a hot topic for historians today, too. How about other questions? There's one back there, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, you. Yeah, sure. or either of you.
You haven't commented on the cost of the British Navy and the importance of the Navy
Yes.
to the colonies and the worldwide Commonwealth. I wonder if the cost of it and the fact of it plays into this.
You have those
Obviously
figures
does
right at
have to.
hand?
I don't have the figures at hand. I don't know if you do. I mean, can I just say something? I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I just had a graduate student defend her dissertation on the British Navy in the middle of the 18th century. So the British Navy costs a lot, costs less than the Army. But one of the really important moments of the consolidation of what I've been calling this kind of authoritarian Whig faction is precisely the naval reforms of the 1740s. So Grenville is on the Navy board. The Earl of Halifax, who's the head of the Board of Trade, is in the 1760s, is on the Navy board in the 1760s. The Duke of Bedford, who's another one of the supporters of these guys, is also on the Navy board. So what ends up happening, the 1740s is really important. It's the war, what we call, us European historians, call the War of the Austrian Succession. It's a disastrous war for Britain and its empire. I mean, they win some battles, but they don't, it's basically a series of French victories, with the exception that Britain does gain Halifax. But the argument that these guys made in the middle of the war was that the British Navy wasn't as good as the French Navy. So there needed to be radical reforms. And the radical reforms included creating a hierarchy within the Navy so that there was a clear line of command, which there hadn't been before, that the Navy actually wear uniforms. They thought this was a good idea, but that also the Navy be able to impose martial law on people who desert wherever they desert from, and include and to develop these new admiralty courts, which become extremely important in North America, which can be enforced. Their rulings can be enforced by the British Navy. So what you get for the first time is this extremely hierarchically organized organization that is extremely well disciplined, much better disciplined than the British Army in the middle of the 18th century, and it is being used precisely and intentionally, because remember, Grenville's ideas come out of this, to enforce things like the Navigation Acts. Now, they don't do a great job. I mean, there's all sorts of, but the idea is very much to enforce revenue collection on the colonies from the beginning, from the 1740s. This plays a really, really important role because of a lot of incidents, some of which took place in Rhode Island.
Isn't it also true that the Navy is much more of a meritocracy than the Army? You bought your commission in the Army. If you wanted to become a captain or a major, then you bought it. The Navy, if those of you who are Jack Aubrey fans know about that merit did count. And of course, the Navy has a special place in Englishmen's hearts, going back to the Armada. So the Army is scary. The English do not like the Army stationed on their territory, which comes into play when these Townsend duties are interesting because the cost of maintaining these forts is very expensive. All these soldiers. So what if the British ministry thinks, well, we'll save money. Let's move them to Boston, to New York, to Philadelphia. It'll be cheaper to maintain them in the city than out in Detroit. And well, of course, this is crazy when you think about it. What are the troops doing in New York and Boston? You've got 4,000 troops in Boston in 1769 in a population of 15,000. Well, the consequence of that, of course, is the Boston Massacre. And the fear of the Army is deep-rooted in English culture. And the Navy has this, first of all, the Navy's out there somewhere, and not in your home. And this imposition, I think, of the Army and the importance of the Boston Massacre in 1770 is crucial. There's so many incidents that occur so that whatever affection, whatever feelings of loyalty that a colonist had towards the mother country are slowly eroded in the course of this decade. We couldn't even begin to go over every incident that occurs that erodes what I think was a real affection. I mean, the celebration of George III's accession to the throne is really, it's quite remarkable in the colonies. Of course, they never had seen him, and they just hear about it, but he is the first really English king out of the Hanoverian line, and I think there's a tremendous amount of excitement. In 15 years, that affection is eroded through a series of little things, to the point where I think the bulk of the population was patriot, and they were working hard to undermine the British position. And the British trying to put down an insurgency, as we've come to realize, not only in Vietnam, but in Iraq and now in Afghanistan, when you're thousands of miles away, it is very, very difficult if you don't have full support of the population. And I think that, in the end, was the British. It's a long-winded answer.